Hello everyone, I'm Kelly Yang from Brown Class of 2027. Today I am honored to invite Yifan to talk about sexual harassment and popularization of sex education. Yifan, can you please introduce yourself as well?
Okay, Kelly, thank you, Kelly, for inviting me to participate in this video recording today. And my name is Ping Yifan. You can call me Yifan. I'm a graduate of Swarthmore College. And then after I graduated, I went to Oxford to study education. And then I just graduated this year and I'm going to UChicago to continue my studies in the anthropology program. In this meeting today, I want to share my role as an ally in sexual harassment cases. I have helped a lot of students around me who have experienced sexual harassment. I want to share some of my experience as not only a bystander, but also a person who has actively engaged in these cases. I also hope that my sharing can help survivors who are going through it or those who have not studied abroad and give you some experience or some suggestions for prevention.
Before I get to the specific case, I'd like to discuss the distinction between the concepts of survivors and victims. Why did you choose to call them survivors rather than victims? And what do you think we should call them?
I think your question is a very good one. And I think that a lot of times we have a misunderstanding in the discussion of assault. We're very used to categorizing the people who are experiencing this as being broken, they're hurt. They're a group of people who don't have the ability to fight back. And of course, they're hurt in a way that we can't deny. And we absolutely have to understand that this is a very traumatizing and very heartbreaking experience. But we can't think that they are necessarily vulnerable and powerless, or that they need to be rescued. In fact, for me, I'd like to call them survivors or fighters, because I think I've found that most of my friends and classmates who I've been working with have a strong spirit of resistance, and then they've gone through the process of fighting back. After these incidents, although they have been traumatized, they are not depressed and passive, but are very active and have the spirit of resistance to fight with the school and the persecutors. So they are really warrior survivors and are not a fragile and small objects that needs to be saved in our stereotypical image. So why do I think it is more appropriate to use the term survivor? Survivor is more relevant to our actual situation. I think it's like the earthquake rescue. We as allies, first of all, can't hurt them again if we are very insensitive in the definition or the naming. If we use the wrong word to call them, we may actually traumatize them again. So I think it's very important to name them as such and then call them survivors.
Then all of our subsequent discussions, we would be calling these people survivors or fighters. Next, I'd like to ask Ifan to share some of the previous cases of helping these survivors or fighters to fight for their rights. And can you talk about the feelings and process of communicating with these survivors, the process of negotiating with the school, and some of the systematic problems that you noticed?
I think I could say a lot, but I'd like to keep it short and sweet and answer both of your questions by talking about two cases. One about the experience of communicating with intimates and survivors, and the other about the experience of dealing with the school system. First, as an undergraduate student, I was involved in the school's own O4S program, which was a protest against sexual violence in fraternities. During my sophomore year, there was a series of protests against sexual violence in fraternities, and O4S was a way for us to come together to help give a voice to these survivors in hopes of dismantling the fraternity system and ending sexual violence. I think that was my first direct contact with people who were intimate with sexual violence, and then I helped them gather evidence, translate it, and post it online. Of course, I don't want to demean or diminish the voices of survivors themselves in any way, but I want you to understand that when survivors are traumatized, it is often very difficult for them to recall these experiences in a way that is understandable to the outside world, which means that when I documented it, I did see that some of my friends didn't talk about things in the same way when they were asked to recall them again. The chronology was also somewhat different when they tried to recall the experience. Coherent inconsistencies or contradictions or gaps in time may be called false accusations by those who wish to do so, but it is understandable that after a traumatic experience, it is difficult for us to rationally recall a complete and logically coherent timeline, and if there are gaps, it does not mean that the story is inaccurate. If there are holes in the timeline, it doesn't mean it's inaccurate. It means that the narrators may be trying to remember something that they do not want to remember, that their emotional reactions are irrational, and that they are not able to present a complete story, whether it's an emotional expression or a physical reaction, and that they are not able to tell a complete story. In some cases, the narrator's voice is completely inaudible or their body movements are exaggerated. At this point, whether we take such emotions as a signal for falsehood or a signal for expressiveness is something we should take into account when we record them. One of the things I've learned from my contact with communicators is not to take their emotional reactions or irrationality as a negative signal, but rather as a positive signal. If a person can really calmly say 1, 2, 3, or 4 things, that's good, but it's possible that they haven't really experienced it. If a person speaks in a disconnected way where the logic seems a bit flawed, but it doesn't mean that the person is telling a lie, it just proves that the person is talking about his or her darkest inner self or a wound that he or she doesn't want to show to others. This is one of the things that I have learned from my experience of talking to people who have been through sexual harassment. Then, if you look at the second question about getting along with the school, I have to talk about the fact that the second time that I had to deal with a sexual harassment case was at Oxford. My experience is that the school, because of the many legal issues and the bureaucracy of logistics, is not able to stand up for the survivors in a very quick and effective way. I am saying that because for many reasons I can't speculate whether the school is essentially trying to protect the aggrieved person or is essentially very patriarchal in nature. I can't speculate on whether the school is essentially trying to protect the aggressor or whether it is essentially patriarchal or sexist. I can't speculate on that, but I think that in terms of the substantive experience, the school's administration is very problematic. And I can very clearly say that in some of the big schools, especially in the UK and the US, the school's bureaucracy can make it very slow to appeal the case. And then after I reported the sexual harassment case on my friend's behalf, the school sent different teams to deal with me. And each team said that we would take care of what part of the case and would talk to the other teams. However, after a while, I talked to the other teams. For example, when I went to check the update from Team A to Team B, I found out that Team A didn't have an update for Team B at all, and then Team B didn't know that Team C was also dealing with the case, so the school did not know about it. So there is a lot of confusion between several departments in the school, which means that the responsibility has been dispersed so that when it comes to who is in charge of who, it could be that mental health is under the control of one department, or it could be that the students are under the control of one department and then it goes to one department and then to the other. Department A is in charge of giving academic extension because you are seriously traumatized and you need some extra time to deal with school assignments, exams, and so on. This academic things are under the control of different groups of people. The coordination is very poor. The students need to have a strong initiative or even need the help of others in order to go through the process. This is the first thing I feel, and the second thing I feel is that the school may not be sensitive enough to deal with many things. The school asked my friend to repeat what have happened to her again and again. I think it's a very painful thing for the person who has experienced it, and it's not a particularly appropriate way of dealing with it. The problem is also the way that the investigators listen to the survivors. In schools, generally speaking, we find that head of the department or the person who has to deal with the situation are often men, but we know that most cases of sexual assault that are reported by women. How can we have a good communication? This is something that I don't want my friends to go through again, including myself. I even had a fight with a teacher saying that you are standing here in a dignified manner, listening to this very sad story, and you don't do anything about it. Many schools don't realize this kind of problem. So we found that the investigator and director are not very professional in dealing with sexual assault cases, even though they may be impartial, but this kind of impartiality can still cause secondary damage. If you imagine a girl retrospectively and verbally recounting her experience of being assaulted to a man, it could traumatize the survivors again. So these are my criticisms of the school system. Finally, we summarize the two problems that I've just described as the communication with the school and the students. I think that if there is a systematic problem, I think that systematically we don't have enough knowledge about sexual assaults. We still typically think that aggression is a small thing, and we still typically think that aggression makes women less empowered as a whole. We still typically feel that aggression should be a very simple and straightforward, you're a bad guy, you're a victim, you're a persecutor. It's just a simple relationship. I just need to get rid of the guy or get rid of the persecutor. So there's a tendency to simplify things. We like to keep things simple. So that's a longer answer. I'm going to give.
Yeah, I think the issue of awareness is really a point of concern. So I think if we go forward, if we talk about allyship, is there anything we should be aware of? That is to say, if we want to be a very supportive ally, besides recognizing that they may not be a victim, as you just said, they are also fighters and survivor who are strong. What are the other communication points to pay attention to? For example, how to get the survivor's trust, because many times a lot of survivors, they are actually not willing to share their experience with you or go over the reporting process again and again. As an ally, whether help them do these negotiations with the school is a kind of allyship. What are the methods can be very supportive to help them?
Just now, you said a lot of survivors are not willing to repeat their own experience. I think one of my core views is that we should always to prioritize the survivor's need and their will. That is to say, we should understand that we are allies and we should not speak for them. No matter how much you want to help them, this is their own thing, their decision-making. Powers are in their own hands, so that never say that because this does not work, then I'll help you to do all the things against the survivor's will. I think it is a wrong thing. I think their willingness to share is still in their hands if they really feel that this thing they can't do it anymore, if they really feel that they can no longer handle this thing, and you don't have the right to say, I'm going to help you do this thing because the subsequent result of the repercussion or the emotional damage is not something that you're going to deal with. So I think the first point is that we have to understand that it is always their decision to share with the public or step out. But if they can't heal from the trauma, I think one of the things you can do to assist is if they don't want to talk to you, you can introduce them to some resources, whether it's some of your mentors around you or some of your mutual friends, or you think that they might be a little bit more close to them. You can say that you can't tell me about this, but I know that there are some teachers that have this kind of experience or have this kind of knowledge, or a center that you can go to, or a friend who will understand you. For example, I might introduce the survivor to people who has the same identity or gender. In that case, those with the same identity are more appropriate to talk with. I also do not want to discriminate between men and women in terms of the number of people who have been victims of sexual assault, but the majority of reported cases of sexual assault are still committed by heterosexuals. Many of those who are sexually assaulted are women. At this time, we men as ally, often the sense of justice is there, but while we have a sense of justice, we also need to keep a proper distance between us and the survivors of sexual assault. How to keep this distance is not to go too much to ask for some details. Even if a girl tells you, you need to understand that these details need to be kept confidential and that letting other people know will cause problems and misunderstandings. The first step may be to let a girl contact the survivor will be better, or to keep a distance. The other thing is that when heterosexual males deal with this, you have to realize that the survivor's experience is not at all equivalent to your emotions. No matter how impassioned you may be listening to these victims and how strong your sense of justice may be, you know that you, as a man, can't empathize 100% with what your female friend is going through. So at this point, you might actually be listening more than giving advice. So the third thing I would suggest to an ally is that a lot of times not talking is the way to go. It's that your silent support can be good because a lot of times, I'm not saying that everybody doesn't get it, but if you don't understand the situation very well, but you have a strong sense of justice and then you're in a headlong rush and you're posting things on the internet, all I can say is that you're causing emotional harm to your friend for the second time. So if you don't know what's going on, keep quiet and wait for it to unfold. Introduce your female friends to some extra resources or your friends to some extra resources. Is much better to expose them online right away or to run out and confront the aggressor with a wide-eyed look. So I'm going to wait a little bit. I think this is a common mistake that we make as allies.
So if you summarize it, the biggest thing is to have an understanding of the survivor's need and then respect their priority first. Don't impose your will on the survivors.
Yes, and as I mentioned just now, I actually forgot to mention one point. That is, in terms of emotion, just now, maybe after I said that, people may think that the approach is too passive. Then what is the difference between me and standing by? I think a core difference lies in the fact that you are giving him a strong emotional support. That is, maybe you won't suddenly curse the aggressor on the internet or run over to confront others, but you will still give your friend a very strong and decisive signal that I will still support you no matter what happens to you. In private, you will still give your friend a very strong signal that I still support you no matter what happens to you. As a friend, as a relative, as a close international student friend group, I am on your side. I think that when you say something like this, and in your daily life, you may say that she is afraid to go out lately, and you help her to buy daily necessities. She may be more stressed out with her studies, and you can give an extra effort to help her with her homework or walk with her. You may walk with her to the dormitory or ask her friends to come and participate in activities with her. These are allyship. She may not be directly related to the solution or advancement of the sexual harassment cases, but these has an influence on the individual's mental health or sense of security. In fact, I think this form of allyship are more basic and doable. My experience with dealing with the school requires a lot of energy and also need a lot of professional knowledge. Maybe you think my own ability is not enough to deal with the school, so what can I do? I think paying attention to the individual's emotional health and paying attention to the individual's safety is also something that allyship can do.
Okay. I think in addition to allyship, I would like to go back to the process of negotiating with the school, that in the process of negotiation is to say, if, for example, I have been harassed, then the first thing I would say, I would think of why I don't go to the police, why I have to go to the school to report. According to your experience, because you have already helped with so many cases, why do you think the survivors choose to report to the school rather call the police? Why did they make such a choice, and what were some of the implications behind that choice?
Yes, I think the issue you just mentioned is actually a concern for a lot of people. And even I think it's grown to the point where it's a prejudice. Now we see people on the internet saying, how come those sexually harassed people didn't call the police in the first place? They are not calling the police because they are lying. I think this is really a kind of ignorant criticism. Why? Because anyone who has experienced this in a UK or US university, whether it's a bystander or a relative, knows that calling the police is a very difficult thing to do. What are the difficulties? First of all, many international students come to a country where they don't know anyone. You let a foreigner in the first year in the university, and it is clear that generally speaking, sexual assaults often happen in the first few months or a year before coming to the United States or coming to the United Kingdom, is because you are vulnerable. At this time, you are vulnerable, not that you do not have the energy, just to say that you may not be aware of the sexual harassment, so it is easier to become vulnerable, to be victimized. I think this is a big factor, that in the case of you are not familiar with the place and do not understand the law, many people's subconscious first thing is not to report to the police this. I think it is very easy to understand, for example, you were stolen in a foreign country's cell phone. A lot of people's choice is to accept their own bad luck rather than to go to the police station to make a fuss, because you do not know the place. You may not be able to speak the language very well, so we also need to know that with the police to deal with, the police of the English language is not a common language in the daily life. It's not a simple English, like I have a question, it's very complicated. And the second thing you need to do is to explain to a white male what's going on, which is already very, very, very painful, but also in your own second language. In the Oxford case, there was a female who couldn't speak the language. A female friend called the police. However, the police was a British male. My female friend did not want to talk to him about what had happened to her, so she ended up giving up on reporting. The third point I think is why it's difficult to call the police is because when something like this happens in a school, the police can investigate it, they can file a case, but the processing time will be very, very, very long. And many times it is not enough to reach a criminal offense when it is really very, very difficult to get evidence. An Oxford friend told me the police file in the United Kingdom take an average processing time of 1,600 days. Think about this. There is only 365 days. After this many days, this student may have graduated already. The issues with filing such a claim for this kind of non-vicious sexual assault case to the police are: first, it has a very high threshold; second, pressure is very high; third, resolution may be very timely. Reporting such an incident at school might take 3 months. 3 months is already very long. After 3 months, the aggressor might be withdrawn from the school or given warnings, while the police may take 3 years and more to even press an official charge. So I think this is why a lot of people did not choose to report. This is not to say that you cannot report to the police, but why many people do not report to the police is that there are objective barriers. Now, a lot of people on the internet blame or accuse the survivor, asking why you did not report to the police at that time, or why you did not say at that time at the first place. Not reporting means that you are absolutely lying. I think people with a lot of prejudice would say this kind of thing.
Yes, do you think that in such a situation with so many procedural difficulties, we should choose another way to punish these perpetrators? For example, by exposing them in social media.
I think this question actually you asked makes me myself also very conflicted. I actually did expose aggressors in support of the survivors in the past few years, but I do so a large part of the reason is because I really 100% personally see and hear the whole incidents, that I have to understand this thing is 90% true. After all, I'm not the survivors themselves, so I cannot be 100% sure, but because of the cross-examination I have done to understand, I expose this thing because I am very convinced of his authenticity. But forwarding a lot of these kind of exposure posts on the Xiaohongshu or in Weibo will have some of potential legal hazards. From time to time, you do not know how much truth or falsehood are there, that we only listen to the explanation of one side. Even if the person wrote it with all his heart and soul, he may have included some fallacies or factual errors that he doesn't even know about, and then there may be some problems when I repost it, which I am very worried about. Another thing is that I think that although this social media post or exposure post has a very good punishment, I don't think that people will take it too seriously, and that's one of the reasons why I am angry or regretful, and it may be a big problem for me. A place of anger or regret may be for me, I wrote a piece of manuscript, very righteous indignation to send out, but the result is that after a few times people change the flavor into an entertaining gossip. I want to make it clear that cheating is different from sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is a crime. We are exposing a potential criminal, not just an immoral person. Such misinformation is something I am afraid to see when disseminating the information.
Then I would like to know is that after you post these sexual harassment aggressors, what kind of a reaction do you get from the internet? And then you think about these reactions. Are people very supportive or just being nosy?
Kelly, what would be your reaction if you see such a post?
My first reaction may be to say, first see if this is true, and then go to choose to reply or respond, because often I think people are following the trend. That is to say, people immediately forward the post. They think that this is a kind of allyship, but I think that this is not necessarily allyship, but also may become a victimizer.
Kelly, yes, I especially agree. I think your reaction is a true reaction of many of my friends. Why is it that I get so many likes on this post but so few retweets? Or if it did get reposted, I was scared instead because the text they paired it with was very sensationalized. Let's just say we're coming together to fuck him up or something. I'm actually scared because these people are instead the least close to the truth. So a lot of the responses I get are skeptical optimism or skeptical support. People might say, ask me, is this thing really true? Or Yifan, how do you know about this? Then I said that this thing is my personal experience or my friends. I am 100% aware of the situation, so I expose it, and then they would repose the post. In fact, I think these posts are meaningful, or that I've been vocalizing the correct thing, because if a victimizer's story is exposed, it's possible that his previous scandals or his previous behavior will also be unearthed. For example, I exposed a classmate's behavior and found out that he had done similar behavior sometime before his undergraduate, and he had already done similar things in high school. So I think it shows that people's support comes from the same experience or empathy. I think exposure is good, although it's very unfortunate that this happened. I think that this exposure could save more people from being victimized. Another good thing is that after exposure, the student who harassed my friend might be going to a new school. If you don't expose him, things like this can only exist in a small circle. But after you expose him, these black histories will go with him into a new environment. The students in that new environment may be alert and may avoid more such things from happening. What I regret is that the first month after the Oxford incident, I didn't know if it was true or not, so I didn't choose to tell my friend, which led to my friend also becoming a victim of this person. I was a bit regretful I did not tell the public earlier. This thing does have some of the hidden dangers of this true or false elements, but I think if this thing is confirmed to be true, and you have a lot of confidence that this thing can protect you, my friends, then I think it is a very good to go to. Tell them is a good avoidance of the risk of things.
And I think another thing is that because considering a lot of the legal process and the school report, it actually takes a long time. Then I think for the perpetrators, the cost of doing bad things is very low. So I think if there is an exposure of this behavior, it actually raises the cost of them to do bad things so that they feel you cannot get away from it.
Yes, yes. So the analogy I often use is Don't treat the exposed person as a burn. They are not a burn, they are a virus. They will spread from you to others. So it's not how we go about spreading the word. It's not how we find a cure. If we deal with an epidemic, the first step may not be to find a cure vaccine, but to quarantine. It's the best quarantine is to make them ashamed to show up or afraid to carry out the next activity. So I think exposure is an option. It's definitely not a permanent solution or even a little bit dangerous. And I would ask everyone to use it with caution. But I think it does curb the spread. I think it's one of the best ways to stop the spread of the disease.
What we've been talking about is what kind of steps we have to take after being sexually harassed, and then what allyship looks like. So actually, for many, our audience today are also incoming freshmen. They may not understand the culture at first. So what do you suggest to these people? That is to say, how do you think they can have a protection mechanism, and how do you think they can be protected?
I really want to share this and thank Kelly for giving me this opportunity. I think I've actually answered this question before at a freshman orientation. A student asked, I don't understand this culture. Is it that I'm uncomfortable or am I just being too sensitive? But I want to firmly assure everyone, especially those who have just arrived in the US, regardless of your gender or orientation, that you should follow your heart. Your feelings will tell you whether a behavior is appropriate or not. If something makes you uncomfortable, causes any kind of discomfort, whether cultural, physical, or sexual, or if you feel ashamed or uneasy, then it has crossed a line. You are an individual and you're not here to just adapt to their culture. Secondly, I want to address the issue of gender. Whenever sexual harassment is mentioned, there seems to be an inevitable and unnecessary gender dispute or hostility. But I want to reiterate that sexual harassment affects everyone. As a person, as an individual, you could experience it. So don't just point to whether you're male or female, your sexual orientation, or how you dress. These might only be secondary factors. We should all have a tolerant attitude towards this issue. Don't think it couldn't happen to you or wonder how it could. On the other hand, don't be overly cautious thinking that because of who you are, you're bound to encounter certain things. Avoiding social interactions out of fear is also not advisable. Both extremes, thinking it's impossible to happen to you or being excessively fearful and socially withdrawn, are not healthy. Finally, I want to emphasize that despite the challenges and difficulties, the best approach is still to seek help and report the incident. Despite the many issues, schools in the US and UK have ample resources to protect you from secondary harm. For example, a school can immediately issue a restraining order to prevent the perpetrator from entering your dormitory or arrange a move. So don't hesitate to seek help for fear of slow school response or worry about friends' opinions. From my experience, many friends choose to tell their relatives or close friends immediately. If you're scared to tell someone, confide in your most trusted friend or roommate. I believe 99% of international students are just and discerning. They know such things are absolutely unacceptable, and the distinction between right and wrong is very clear.
Thank you for sharing so many useful tips today. I think it's a good inspiration and a warning for those who have or haven't been through it. And then I'll stop here today. And thank you again, Yifan.
Thank you, Kelly, for the opportunity to share this. And of course, I still want to reiterate my role as a male character, as an ally. If you want to know more about this or know the voice of the survivor of this experience, I think it's very, very important to empathize or pay attention to women's voices and pay attention to the voice of the survivors when it comes to this.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Kelly, very much.